Welcome to Psychology at the Armwood Sixth Form. The subject is taught by myself, Mrs. Shepherd, and Miss Rennie. Psychology is a study of human behaviour, and it's a 2-year course. At the end of the 2 years, students will sit 3 examinations. All A-level classes in psychology have 4 hours of classwork, along with 4 hours of homework per week. The homework may be independent study. However, with any A-level, the more you put into it, the more you do get out of it. The first exam in psychology is all about research methods. Throughout the year, we look at different types of research methods such as experiments, observations, correlations and self-reports, and students are actually given the opportunity to carry out their own practical work on something they want to find out in the psychological world. By doing this, students gain a deeper understanding of how to do psychological research, along with analysing it, evaluating it, and actually going out there and actually putting psychology into real-world practice. In this unit, we also look at the principles of scientific inquiry as well, and we examine debates such as, is psychology a science? Within the research methods exam, there is analysis, presentation, and data recording. Now, this exam has 10% mathematical content in it, so students are actually required to carry out statistical tests. So it's really important that the GCSE is of a pass standard in maths, along with English as well, because it's very essay-based. There's report writing, and there are also essays within the exam as well. The second exam students will look at is psychological themes through core studies. And within this, over the 2-year period, students will study 20 core studies. Now, the students will have to know these studies inside out, so there is a lot of memory work in this because they need to remember them. However, they're not boring studies. For example, under social psychology, which means that our behaviour is influenced by people around us, the social world, friends and peer groups. We look at responses to people in authority, and one study in this section is by someone called Milgram, who's a social psychologist, and he wanted to see how far people would go to obey an authority figure, and he actually ended up asking people to administer electric shocks to people to see if they would do it. And of course they did. They did administer electric shocks, enough to kill people 3 times over. However, what he didn't tell them was that the shocks weren't real. It was a fake machine they were using. So they're not boring studies. They're really quite exciting, really. We also look at topics such as memory, attention, external influences on children's behaviour, which is another classic study like Milgram. And in this one, we look at Bandura, and he looks at transmission of aggression. So he wants to see whether children will copy a role model in beating up a Bobo doll, which is a toy. We also look at how children develop morally. And then we also go on to biological psychology, and we look at parts of the brain. We look at understanding disorders, and we look at how different people are within individual differences. So there are lots of different topics, and like I said, none of them are boring. They're all pretty exciting. Students will then go on to answer essay questions and short answer questions within the exam on these studies. Here are some of the core areas here that we do look at in psychology, and that picture is actually taken from the actual experiment of Milgram, where they are connecting Mr. Wallace up to his electric machine. When we get into year 13 with the psychology, so the second half of it, we actually look at what we call applied psychology. And in this section, we look at mental health, sports psychology, and criminal psychology. In mental health, we look at topics such as the history of mental health, we look at biological applications of mental health, and we also go on to look at alternative reasons for mental health issues. We look at disorders such as depression, addiction, schizophrenia as well. Then we go on to sports psychology, where we look at things like how audience have an effect on people's performance, how exercise can help us mentally with our health. And in this, students get the chance to actually become sports psychologists. In the exam, they get given a scenario and they have to apply everything they've learned in sports psychology to the actual scenario. And then finally, we go on to criminal psychology. This is the same principle as the sports psychology. They have to learn a few studies and then apply them in the exam. We look at different things like what makes a criminal. We look at neighbourhood safety measures. We look at why people turn to crime as well. So we explore quite a lot in the actual area of criminal psychology. And there are a lot of studies to learn, once again. However, like I said before, they are not boring studies. For example, in What Makes a Criminal, we look at the physiological and non-physiological reasons for why people turn to crime. And we look at a particular study by Rain, and he looks at brain abnormalities in murderers. So we see if there is a difference in the brain scans of murderers compared to non-murderers, and what part of the brain there is a difference. And then what we take from that is how can we then prevent criminal behaviour, knowing that brains are slightly different in murderers compared to non-murderers. So it's all very interesting and it's all very engaging, and it's a really exciting 2-year course to take. However, like I said, there is a maths element to it and they do need to have English as well, students do. So the entry requirements is 5 GCSE grades 5 or above, including English and maths. That is a must. Students have said in the past that they feel the student-teacher relationship is brilliant. They feel they get a lot out of the subject, and they also say it's not boring, it's exciting, it's different. By looking at human behaviour as well, you can apply this to loads of different jobs. I mean, psychology is about the study of human behaviour, and if you're going to work with humans, this will be really handy in the future. You can go on to university, you can go on to do apprenticeships. There are many, many jobs. We've had a lot of students lately go on to the NHS, into the police as well. Also, you can go on to uni and you can become a doctor of psychology and be a psychologist, a counsellor and therapist. Also, education is a big one for psychology as well, especially where it comes to children development. There are many, many, many different roles you could go with the psychology into the future. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please get in contact with us and I'll be happy to answer any.